When someone hurts us emotionally, psychologically, even physically, there's an immediate neurobiological response that occurs within milliseconds. The amygdala activates, cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and impulse control, starts to get overridden by survival-based circuits, and in that state, our brain starts searching for resolution, often through retaliation or some kind of justice-seeking mechanism. This is not weakness, this is biology. The human nervous system was built for survival, and historically, survival often required defense, even offense. But in a modern context, the same circuitry, if left unmanaged, becomes the architecture of our own suffering. Revenge feels instinctively right to a dysregulated nervous system. In fact, studies using functional MRI have shown that when participants contemplate or execute revenge, there is measurable activity in the brain's reward circuitry, particularly in the nucleus accumbens and ventral striatum. This is the same area activated when people anticipate pleasurable stimuli like food, sex, or winning. In other words, the brain can, in the short term, misinterpret revenge as a form of reward. But there's a critical catch. That dopamine release is shallow, short-lived, and ultimately toxic to long-term well-being. It does not complete the pain loop, it extends it. So what do you do instead? You regulate the system, you reclaim agency over your neurochemistry, and you use the pain not as fuel for destruction, but as a trigger for transformation, because transformation, unlike revenge, changes everything, starting with you. There is a set of neural processes involved in meaning-making. When you experience deep emotional pain, let's say betrayal, humiliation, rejection, the hippocampus and medial prefrontal cortex begin to try and encode the event into your autobiographical memory. It asks, what does this mean about me, about the world? And in that encoding, you are offered a choice. You can encode that moment as a point of rupture and bitterness, or as a point of adaptation and reconfiguration. When you choose to not take revenge, you're not being passive. You are redirecting energy that your nervous system is urging you to spend externally, and instead choosing to refine your internal architecture. This is not weakness, this is an act of biological mastery. Forgiveness, or more precisely, release, reduces activity in the amygdala over time. It restores executive function to the prefrontal cortex. And it allows the autonomic nervous system to shift from sympathetic arousal flight into parasympathetic balance, rest and restore. You are literally repairing your mind and body by choosing not to act out of revenge. That doesn't mean suppressing anger. Anger, when metabolized correctly, is fuel. Anger that is ruminated becomes poison. Here's what you do. Begin by orienting yourself back to breathe and vision. These are the two fastest ways to shift autonomic state. A double inhale followed by a long exhale, a physiological sigh, lowers heart rate and signals safety to the brain. Panoramic vision, where you soften your gaze and become aware of peripheral space, reduces the threat response. These tools are not just calming techniques. They are gatekeepers of higher cognition. Once the system is calm, reflection becomes possible, and here's where you engage in self-directed neuroplasticity. Ask yourself, what did this pain reveal in me? What value was violated? What identity was challenged? What fear was awakened? This is not philosophical. This is procedural memory work. You are giving the brain a new loop, trigger, reflection, restructuring, instead of trigger, revenge, regret. There's something called the neurochemical cost of grudge. When you hold on to resentment, you maintain low-grade inflammation in the body. Elevated levels of cortisol and inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha have been observed in individuals who chronically ruminate on past wrongs. Over time, this compromises immunity, cognition, and even cardiovascular health. So in choosing to not take revenge, you're not just being moral, you're being metabolically wise. Now let's consider time. Time is not neutral in neural healing. If you revisit the pain without constructive interpretation, you rewire the brain to stay wounded. But if you revisit it with the intention to extract growth, you rewire resilience. You convert trauma into wisdom, and here the concept of non-sleep deep rest becomes powerful when the nervous system is allowed to enter deeply restorative states, like yoga nidra, meditation, or even directed daydreaming. The brain consolidates emotional learning and neuroplastic change. These moments of quiet are not escapes from pain, they are rewiring chambers. So what do you actually do when someone has hurt you badly? You acknowledge the pain, don't deny it, you regulate the system through breath, vision, stillness. You reflect not for self-blame, but for self-clarity. You redirect the energy into movement, into learning, into growth. You document it, journal, record, track your healing, because neural change requires reinforcement. And most importantly, you detach from the belief that you need external validation to heal. You do not need their apology. You do not need their downfall. You need your nervous system to become your ally, not your saboteur. Some of the most resilient individuals on Earth, from elite performers to trauma survivors, have learned that power is not found in control over others, but in mastery over response. The neurobiology of resilience shows that people who can find meaning in suffering, who can zoom out, narrate their experience, and metabolize pain into purpose, build more robust prefrontal networks, deeper emotional control, and greater physiological adaptability. In simple terms, they get stronger. Forgiveness, again, isn't approval of the wrong. It's the deliberate removal of that person's continued access to your internal state. Revenge gives them power. Letting go takes it back. And here's something that isn't talked about enough. When you take revenge, your brain memorizes that method of resolution. You are teaching yourself, this is how I deal with pain. That becomes a default circuit. So the next time someone hurts you, even if it's minor, you are biologically inclined to seek some form of retaliation. Over time, this narrows your emotional bandwidth and wires your brain for hostility, not healing. And the price is high. Relationships decay, mental health declines, focus fractures. You become a person who reacts instead of responds. Now flip that. Let's say you choose the opposite. When hurt, you observe. You allow the nervous system to settle. You move, you journal, you create, you metabolize. You find a constructive outlet, exercise, art, learning, service. You give your brain a new protocol. Over time, this becomes the default. You become someone who transduces pain into purpose. You become emotionally anti-fragile. The world is not short of people who will wound you, but what it desperately lacks are people who know how to heal without harming others in the process. That's the real strength. That's what builds legacy. Revenge is loud and temporary. Transformation is quiet and permanent. Your nervous system is listening to your every choice. Your brain is molding itself around your behavior. Choose habits that instruct it to make you stronger, not bitter. Because if you build an identity around pain, pain becomes your home. But if you build identity around adaptation, pain becomes your fuel. There will be moments where the pull to retaliate is overwhelming. That's when you return to the body, breathe, move, write, reflect, reconnect with what you value, not what you fear. Your biology is not your destiny, it's your toolkit. The more you use it with intelligence, the more it serves your evolution. And when you're quiet, when you choose not to respond with force, but with focus, something remarkable happens. Your brain reclaims energy previously lost to conflict. Your attention sharpens, creativity increases, sleep improves, mood stabilizes. Over time, you stop reacting to what hurt you and start building what heals you. You don't just bounce back, you rise. This is not theory. This is science, and it is available to you. Let me know if you'd like this adapted into a YouTube script format, turned into a short version, or broken into slides or quote segments for video editing. Absolutely. Here's the continued speech in the same neuroscientific, reflective style inspired by Dr. Huberman, with no headings or concluding paragraph, aiming to extend the speech to approximately 2,000 more words. You might find yourself wondering why certain moments of emotional pain seem to linger, days, weeks, sometimes even years. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's how memory systems, especially emotional memory circuits, are prioritized in the human brain. When the brain detects a threat or emotional injury, it tags that memory as highly relevant for future reference. The amygdala works with the hippocampus to create an associative map. If that pain involved a betrayal, embarrassment, or emotional shock, the system assumes, correctly from an evolutionary perspective, that it should never be forgotten. Because to forget would be to risk repeating, so it reinforces it. But when we don't process that memory properly, when we react rather than metabolize, We teach the brain to continue associating safety with control and danger with vulnerability. That's a dangerous loop. Choosing not to retaliate doesn't mean you're letting someone get away with something. It means you're refusing to allow them to become part of your long-term identity structure. When we anchor to revenge, we are tying our self-concept to someone else's wrong action. This compromises our autonomy. Think of your nervous system like a piece of neural real estate. Do you really want someone who hurt you to be renting space there indefinitely? Or do you want to reclaim that territory, redesign it, and make it a space of intentional growth? The science of memory reconsolidation shows us that memories, especially emotionally charged ones, aren't static. Each time you recall a memory, especially a painful one, you have a brief window during which the neural representation of that memory becomes malleable again. This is called the labile state. If during this window you introduce new interpretation, insight, or emotional context, the memory restores in a new form. This is how therapeutic change happens. But it also means that every time you revisit a painful experience through the lens of vengeance or anger, you restore it with more charge, more emotional velocity. Over time, it becomes harder to let go. You don't just remember what they did, you feel it over and over again. The alternative, which requires more discipline but results in profound transformation, is to deliberately reinterpret that memory each time it surfaces. Not by denying the pain, but by shifting the focus from what they did to what it taught you, how you responded, and how it helped shape your future standards. This is an act of neural editing. It is a conscious engagement with plasticity, not passivity. That is how you break the loop. There's a term in neuroscience known as experience-dependent plasticity. It means that your brain changes in response to what you repeatedly do, feel, and think. When you respond to pain with focus, structure, and personal growth, your brain learns that adversity is a signal for evolution, and that kind of learning is far more valuable than momentary satisfaction through revenge. Revenge ends the loop but leaves the wound. Growth closes the loop by healing the wound. Pain, when processed properly, builds internal reference points. Every time you choose grace over retaliation, you're building internal scaffolding. You're reinforcing pathways in the brain that associate restraint with strength, silence with power, and clarity with progress. This changes your baseline. Your baseline becomes peace, not chaos, and when your baseline is peace, external provocation becomes less influential. That's how emotional sovereignty is built. Let's not pretend this process is easy. There's a reason why revenge is tempting. It's a fast way to reduce the stress response, but fast doesn't mean effective. In fact, the same research that shows a short-term dopamine spike from revenge also shows a rebound effect: guilt, rumination, social friction, and heightened emotional dysregulation. Revenge is an acute release followed by a chronic residue. It disrupts your sleep architecture, it elevates sympathetic tone, it lowers vagal tone. All of these are markers of reduced health span. On the flip side, choosing to move on, without denial and without revenge, activates regions of the brain associated with compassion and future planning. The anterior cingulate cortex becomes more engaged, enabling better conflict resolution internally. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex strengthens, helping you maintain long-term goals over short-term impulses. The default mode network, involved in self-reflection and identity, reorganizes your personal narrative in a more empowering frame. These aren't abstract changes, they are physical rewiring events. Every time you resist the pull to act on revenge, you prove to yourself that you are not reactive. You are responsive. Responsiveness is the bedrock of agency. It means you are not at the mercy of the stimulus, you are in charge of the outcome. This changes how you feel about yourself. It builds trust in your own system, and when you trust yourself, your anxiety reduces. Your sense of self-efficacy increases. You begin to see adversity not as something to run from or attack, but as something to learn from and grow through. There's also a social dimension to this. Human beings are wired for co-regulation. Your nervous system and the nervous systems of others are constantly in dialogue. When you choose revenge, you ripple chaos. When you choose mastery, you ripple stability. Whether you realize it or not, your energy regulates or dysregulates others. Your decision to stay focused, silent, and consistent becomes a form of leadership. And leadership, in its most grounded form, is nervous system mastery. People follow those who maintain composure under pressure, not those who retaliate impulsively. Now let's talk about somatic residue. When someone hurts you, that emotional wound doesn't just live in your thoughts. It imprints in your body. Tight jaw, clenched fists, shallow breath, disturbed digestion. These are somatic markers of unprocessed emotional charge. If not addressed, these patterns become default body postures, and posture is not just a musculoskeletal event. It shapes emotion, perception, and cognition. So when you choose to not take revenge, that choice must be paired with somatic processing. Movement, breathwork, stretching, even slow resistance training can help discharge the physiological imprint of the pain. The goal isn't to ignore the pain, it's to alchemize it. Let's be clear, boundaries still matter. Choosing not to take revenge does not mean tolerating disrespect. It means responding, not reacting. It means removing toxic influences strategically, not emotionally. It means choosing disconnection from what harms without becoming defined by what harmed you. Your nervous system deserves an environment of safety, and sometimes the most mature act is not revenge, but removal. One of the most fascinating insights from behavioral neuroscience is that revenge activates the same reward system that is triggered by perceived justice, but only temporarily. True long-term satisfaction comes from feeling aligned with your values, not from external validation or retaliation. Values are internal guideposts. They are stable, not situational. When you live according to your values, regardless of external circumstances, you build coherence between your actions and your identity. This coherence is what allows for true mental peace. Peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of alignment. Over time, your brain stops asking, "How can I hurt them back?" and starts asking, "What can I build now that I'm free?" That shift from revenge to creation is when healing really begins, because creation requires coherence. It requires presence. It requires energy. Revenge consumes all three. So if you've been hurt and you're still carrying that fire inside you, ask yourself, is it fueling your growth or is it burning you from the inside? There's another powerful neurobiological loop worth mentioning, the mirror neuron system. When we visualize or mentally simulate an action, we activate similar neural circuits as when we perform it physically. If you constantly ruminate on how you'll get back at someone, your body experiences micro doses of that vengeance loop. Your body doesn't know the difference between thought and rehearsal. That's why mental discipline is so crucial. What you think about repeatedly becomes a part of your biology. So redirect that imagery. Instead of replaying the moment of injury, visualize the moment you walk away from it stronger. Train your mind to rehearse dignity. Neuroscience also teaches us that the brain is predictive. It doesn't just react to the present, it constantly forecasts the future based on past input. If you want to create a different future, internally or externally, you must feed your brain different patterns now. The more often you choose to stay composed, the more your brain learns that composure leads to better outcomes, and then it starts predicting success from restraint, not retaliation. You may never get the closure you thought you needed from the person who hurt you. But the truth is, closure isn't something they give you, it's something you create. It's the moment you realize that your nervous system, your attention, your time, and your energy are far too valuable to be spent on something or someone that tried to diminish them. And when you truly get this, when it becomes embodied, not just understood, you begin to walk through life differently, not with cold detachment, but with informed compassion, not with blind forgiveness, but with intelligent boundaries. You no longer need revenge because you have something far more powerful, self-possession, and that, in the end, is what every nervous system is searching for, not power over others, but peace within yourself. Let me know if you'd like this formatted as a YouTube script, repurposed for a short video, or split into narration, friendly segments. Here's a conclusion to the speech in the same style, tone, and rhythm. In the end, choosing not to take revenge isn't about being passive, it's about reclaiming control over your biology, your attention, and your future. The real victory isn't in watching someone else fall. It's in watching yourself rise without ever needing to push them down, when you decide to focus inward, to build rather than destroy, to regulate instead of retaliate. You create neural pathways for peace, strength, and sustained clarity. That's not weakness, that's wisdom encoded into your nervous system, and it's the kind of power no one can take from you.